Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic episode.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here with yet another supplemental video about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny and the absolute hit job that's being done on it by some in YouTube land. The other day, I put up a video talking about how the Critical Drinker and Angry Joe spouted a bunch of bullshit about this movie. And the reason I did that is because I think it's terrible what the anti-Disney, anti-Kathleen Kennedy, anti-wokerazzi are doing to movies these days, killing them in advance by talking about them for months to years in some cases before they come out and trashing them based on things like the casting and leaks that they have no way of verifying to any reasonable degree of certainty as to their authenticity, and then continuing to shit on them after they're released by doubling down on the bullshit that they said in advance, even though it isn't true. And, though I said I wasn't going to continue to watch more of these videos by these people, I did end up watching two more, one by Gary over at Nerdrotic and one by Mr. Cock, Doomcock. And I just had to make a part two to my video decrying the way they're treating this movie, because I just want to make sure people know that this is going on and that they have a chance to stand up against it, because it's horrible. It's one thing if you don't like a movie and you talk about your opinion and give examples of true things in a movie, things that are actually in a movie, or things that a movie actually suffers from structurally, for example, that you didn't like and that you think makes it not a great movie. But it's another thing to engage in massive exaggerations and outright bullshit talk, as well as saying things about a movie that you don't back up with examples, thereby giving people an impression of a film that is way more negative than it needs to be based on bullshit, keeping them away from said film and helping it flop, which I think is a detriment to the movie industry in general. So I want to talk about what Gary and Doomcock had to say, and we'll start with Gary. He said that going to the dentist was more enjoyable than the film. And of course, that's a massive exaggeration and hyperbolic and doesn't help anybody. It's just a childish thing to say, and it poisons the well unnecessarily. So I take issue with him for that. He said it was insufferable, which again, is a heavy-handed thing to say that I don't think is borne out by the truth, which is that the movie is not insufferable, whatever flaws it may have that keep it from being a 10 out of 10. Again, not helpful to engage in such hyperbole. He said it's a pointless bait and switch, and that the Indy character was desecrated and sacrificed on the altar of agenda to bolster another brunette British woman. And that simply isn't true. It isn't true. The character is not desecrated. The character is not sacrificed on any altar of any agenda. There's no agenda in this film. And we know that because Gary never says what the agenda is. He never points to a specific agenda, which you would think would include an attempt to accomplish a particular goal, which he never states, beyond bolstering another brunette British woman. But she's not bolstered in this movie. There is no bolstering. So he's just full of shit. He said the movie begins and ends with Indiana sad and broken. Well, he's half right. It begins with Indiana sad and broken. But it does not end that way. In the end of the movie, he's starting to come out of it. Things are looking up for Indy. So it's just nonsense for him to say that it ends that way. And the fact that it starts with him that way does not make the movie bad. Heroic characters sometimes go through things that wear them out and make them downcast for a period of time. And then they recover from it, and that's the story. It's what makes them a hero, their ability to overcome. So it's just another bullshit critique that is half not true and half an absurd critique to make. At several points in his video review of the movie, he picks on the black CIA agent in the movie, insinuating that the actor who was cast was a diversity hire. And, I don't know whether or not this person was hired because they were black and the producers wanted to have at least some diversity among the cast. Maybe that's what happened. But the character is so insignificant in the movie that there's no reason to pick that bone. There's no reason to call it out. It doesn't affect the quality of the movie a single iota. And it just shows that Gary doesn't like to see black people in movies. Now, if he saw me say that, he'd say that I was assassinating his character and that that's not true, and that he's perfectly happy to see black people in movies. And that's probably true, as long as they come off in the movie to him in a way that he thinks black people should be portrayed in movies. And that they do things in the movie or don't do things that he thinks are organic or inorganic to black people. So I don't know why he would pick that particular niche. It's just unnecessary, and it makes him look like an asshole. He called the Phoebe Waller-Bridge character an insufferable feminist. And I don't know much about Phoebe Waller-Bridge's politics in real life, and she may in fact be what you would call a feminist. And if you don't agree with feminism as it exists in modern society, then you're going to find people like that insufferable, and that's fine. But he's confusing the character here for the real person, because the character is in no way a demonstrable feminist. She behaves a bit roguishly in the film and in a way that's a bit in your face, but there's nothing feministic about her character at all. She never brings up the fact that she's a woman. She never makes any comments about men in general that I recall. So it's just a bullshit thing to say about the character. I didn't find the character insufferable, certainly not by the middle and end of the film. In the beginning, the character is kind of a bad person, but that's the point. They're supposed to be a bad person that you don't like as an audience member, and that you're happy to see change their ways by the end. So it's not a bug that the character is insufferable, it's a feature. And his not understanding that does not make the movie bad or the character bad. So it's a bullshit thing to say. He calls the chase scene through the parade an overbloated CGI sequence. Now, yes, there's a massive amount of CGI in that sequence, but I thought it was great. There's a full-blown parade in New York City through which there's a bit of a chase, during which Indiana Jones is riding a friggin' horse. I thought that was cool as hell. And yeah, they accomplished it through CGI, and it's abundant, and it looks very New York City, very gigantic in scope. And I thought it was fantastic. So I don't know why he would pick on that. It looked real. It didn't look terrible by any stretch of the imagination. So why pick on it? It's a big action movie. There are going to be big set pieces. And yes, CGI is the way things are done now when it comes to stuff like that. And it looked good and it worked. So why he picked on it, I don't know, other than he just wanted to pick on it. Just wanted to find something negative to say. So he said, oh, it's CGI. Pointless thing to say. He says that Indiana Jones is depicted as a dick in this movie because he takes the Dial of Destiny from Baz and doesn't destroy it as he promised Baz he would do. Well, I don't think that makes him a dick. I think he told Baz when he needed to tell him to get the thing away from him because Baz was obsessing over it and it was destroying his life. And I don't think Indy could bring himself to destroy an archaeological artifact. And he, though he may have meant to carry through with his promise when he made it. So I don't think it makes him a dick. It makes him human. And so it's just an example of Gary not understanding what he was seeing. And again, it's one thing to have an opinion, but if your opinion is based in you not understanding what you saw, then it's a junk opinion. And you shouldn't be offering it to tens of thousands of people. He thinks that the line about capitalism in the movie was a deliberate commentary on capitalism on behalf of Kathleen Kennedy specifically, and a negative commentary at that. But of course, it isn't. It's just the Phoebe Waller Bridge character trying to assuage her crimes. She's referring to what she did as capitalism because she's trying to make it okay that she did what she did, which is stealing the dial of destiny, or the piece of it that she has, and trying to sell it. And that's not a negative commentary on capitalism. It's the character trying to blow off the bad things that she's done by attributing it to, oh well, it's just capitalism, just how things work. She's not making a negative commentary about capitalism. And Gary isn't the only one to suggest that it is. He's just one more person doing it, and he's full of shit. That's not what it is. And again, opinion is one thing, but he failed to understand what it actually is. And that's what led him to this opinion. So it's bullshit. He called the chase scene in Tangier contrived, but it really isn't any more contrived than any chase scene in any action movie. They deliberately put chase scenes in action movies for a reason. They're always contrived. Now, do they come off as more organic in some films than others? Maybe. But like, I thought this came off pretty organically. And to the extent that maybe it was a little contrived, you know, it's a movie. It's an action movie. Like, where is your suspension of disbelief? How do you go into a movie like this without a suspension of disbelief? A willing suspension. It's just a dumb thing to say. He says that he can believe all the crazy antics from the previous Indiana Jones movies, such as angels coming out of the Ark of the Covenant and killing people, such as a guy still being alive after his heart is taken out of his body in Temple of Doom, people surviving falling out of a plane by using a raft that they then land on, and even Indiana Jones surviving a nuclear blast by hiding inside an old refrigerator. But he can't believe the claim on behalf of the Phoebe Waller Bridge character, and I guess other people, that she's beautiful. And he does this 3 times, which, okay, he's entitled to his opinion as to her appearance. But that is an entirely ad hominem attack. It's an ungentlemanly thing to say. And it has no place in a serious journalistic film review. And again, it makes him look like an asshole. So I take issue with it. And it doesn't stop there. He calls her Big Bird, and he refers to her as a stork. And these are just horrible, disgusting things to say. And Gary, you really should be better than that. You just should be better than that. And I'm going to leave it there as far as this particular issue. He says that in the movie, Indiana Jones is Phoebe Waller-Bridge's sidekick. This is a charge that others have leveled as well. It's just not true. It's not true. Does her character drive some of the stuff that happens in the movie? Yes. None of it reduces Indiana Jones to her sidekick. That is a bullshit thing to say. Even the kid character in the movie at one point tells Phoebe Waller-Bridge, oh, by the way, you've lost control of this narrative. Because, yeah, in the beginning, she steals the thing and runs off and leaves him behind. And yes, so she's kind of got Indy behind the 8 ball in the beginning. But that's a place that heroes sometimes are in movies, having to come from behind, being temporarily outwitted by the villain or held back by circumstances, and then they conquer those circumstances. She is never the prime protagonist of the movie, and he is never her sidekick. It's just a ridiculous bullshit thing to say. He says that the kid had one flight lesson, but then is able to fly a plane, and that's not true. We only see the kid getting one flight lesson. But you're supposed to understand from the scene that this is something he's been doing repeatedly over a period of time, under the tutelage, as it were, of a patron of the establishment that he works in. He has this ad hoc flight simulator set up, and he goes through the motions of flying a plane while checking his actions with a pilot that's in the building and sitting at a nearby table. So he's been practicing this over a period of time. He has not had one flight lesson. So again, this is an example of Gary not understanding what he was seeing. So it's a bullshit critique. He picks on the moment in the end where indeed Indy does contemplate staying back in time. And he says that because such could damage history, which it could have, it's completely out of character for Indy and therefore stupid. But as true as it is that it's completely out of character for Indy, it's something that occurs in a weak moment for Indy when he's not himself, when he's gone through some stuff at the end of a series of events that's like the crap icing on top of a crap cake of stuff that he's been dealing with in his life. And he sort of resigns himself to this fate that, doesn't make sense for the character. But Gary is forgetting that heroes sometimes falter. Not only do they sometimes find themselves behind the eight ball, like I said before, but they sometimes have personal failings where they falter and forget themselves. It's a thing. And, in the end, when the character is back in New York because of the actions of Phoebe Waller-Bridge, it's apparent that he realizes he's happy to be back home and didn't really want to stay in the past. So he comes out of it. And, they pick on these critics pick on this scene because, oh, Phoebe Waller-Bridge had to save the day and take him back against his will because, Indy just can't, make the right decision on his own. So they had to bring in the brunette to do it. Sometimes heroes need to be called on their bullshit and they need to be redirected by the people around them and indeed saved from themselves. It's a thing. It in no way makes a movie bad, and it in no way shits on the character of Indiana Jones or any other hero or protagonist when this occurs. It's just a bullshit thing to say. He says that the movie is poorly shot and poorly edited, but he gives no examples of poor shots or poor edits to back up that claim. He spends a lot of time talking about little plot holes or contrivances in the movie. And, those things aren't great. And that's why this movie isn't a 10 out of 10 and more of a 7 or an 8 out of 10. But the thing is that stuff is throughout the other Raiders of the Lost Ark movies. How do I know that? Not having seen them in so long, because I know that no film is perfect. So you could go back and watch those movies, and there are going to be things where you go, well, that was convenient. It happens in good movies. So again, it's just a bullshit critique to me. He says that in the movie, the Dial of Destiny was only ever set to go to one place, and that was not my understanding. They end up going to, the BC era accidentally because the calculations that were made didn't account for continental drift because continental drift was not programmed into the formula of how to use the device because it wasn't known about in the time of Archimedes. So it isn't that the dial was only programmed to go to that one place. It's that they went there instead of elsewhere because of an error in the calculations. So again, that's just an incorrect thing to say as far as I can tell. The last critique that Gary levels in his video is that the film is doing poorly at the box office. And, he's just forgetting that other recent films which came out and had similarly disappointing openings went on to make almost $1 billion. So again, it's just a low blow, cheap shot to take at the movie. So I just find his commentary on this film to be egregious and that it amounts to poisoning the well. Both before the movie came out, he had comments that did that. And in this video, he does it again in terms of the future of movie making. So I had to call him out on it because I think it's egregious. Not that he'll ever see this. Anyway, moving on to Doomcock. Doomcock called the film a disgrace, an insult to fans, and that it grinds a masculine icon into the dirt. It doesn't grind a masculine icon into the dirt. It's just not true. He says that the Phoebe Waller-Bridge character is depicted in this movie as the bestest ever, which means a super duper woman character that has zero flaws and is just super awesome at everything. And that's not true. First of all, she's depicted as a flawed person who's doing bad things. So right there, she's not the bestest ever, right? She's kind of a terrible person. Secondly, her plan to sell the piece of the Dial of Destiny goes wrong. And if she were the bestest ever, it wouldn't go wrong. She would have accomplished her goal. During the car chase, when the vehicle that she and Indy and the kid are using falters, she can't get it going again. Indy does. In the end, when she tries to rescue him or help him out of a bad spot, she ends up needing rescuing. So it's just not true that she's depicted as the bestest ever. She's depicted as a capable person with a good memory and some skills, but she's not depicted as the bestest ever. It's just not true. He calls this the Fleabag movie. Not true. She is never the main protagonist of this film. It's always Indy. He's mistaking the fact that the character has some impressive qualities, as does Indy, for the character dominating the film, which she doesn't. And I would bet you if you timed out the sequences, she doesn't have as much screen time as Indy, or certainly not more. And it would need to be more for it to be called the Fleabag movie. So that's just a bullshit thing to say. He says that Indy is her sidekick in the movie. It's not true. I don't think anyone is anyone's sidekick in the movie. Well, the kid is Phoebe Waller-Bridge's sidekick, but other than that, neither Indy or the Phoebe Waller-Bridge character are anyone's sidekick in the movie. It's not true. He says that Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character belittles Indy and outfights him. Now, she does say some belittling things to him. She does hurl some insults at him. But in The Last Crusade, Sean Connery's character does the same thing repeatedly. So is that movie trash? He says she outfights him. I don't know how true that is. I think she fights well at times in the movie, as does Indy. I don't think she outfights him. It's just not true. It's a hyperbolic thing to say that he doesn't back up with moment to moment examples. He just says it as though it's true and leaves it at that. That's not how you do a film review, Vic. He claims that there were reshoots and that there were multiple endings that tested badly, resulting in a tacked on ending, and the director disputes this. He disputes that there were any reshoots. So he can say this all he wants, he can't prove it. He says you can tell that the ending is tacked on and that it's because they had to do reshoots. Well, the ending is a little abrupt, but I wouldn't call it tacked on, and it doesn't prove anything. Except that maybe they didn't know how to end the movie, which happens. So it's just a bullshit thing to say that he can't prove. He says that Phoebe Waller-Bridge replaces a male icon in this film. She doesn't. He says that Indiana Jones is sacrificed on the altar of woke in this movie. He isn't. There is no woke in this movie. There's a female character that has a little bit of gumption, a little bit of spunk. There's no wokeness in the movie. They're forgetting how the Marion character was portrayed in the first movie. She was portrayed similarly, but you don't hear them complaining about that. He says that Phoebe Waller-Bridge solves all the puzzles and saves Indy repeatedly. That's not true. They solve the puzzles together. Indiana Jones himself solves one of the puzzles alone at the end. So it's just not true. If you want to say she solves almost as many puzzles as Indy does throughout the movie, you can say that. That would be true. But there's no reason to go beyond that and exaggerate and be hyperbolic and say she solves all the puzzles in the movie and Indy's like a second banana to her in that regard. It's not true. Now, I don't remember the film entirely well enough to say that she never saves him during the movie. Maybe she does at one point. Okay. But I do remember that he saves her at one point in the movie. So it's tit for tat. So what's the problem? Now, to his credit, Doomcock, unlike Gary, does talk about some positive things in the movie. And some of his negative remarks are, in fact, attributed to specific elements of the structure of the film. So at least he went that far to point out some things about the movie structurally that he didn't think worked. And that's valid. And some of his critiques are pure opinion, and there's nothing wrong with that. He's entitled to have his opinion. But again, if your opinion is formed by things in the movie you didn't understand, it's not an opinion you should be expressing to tens of thousands of people. But now that I've built him up, let me go back to criticizing him again because he repeats the nonsense that other people have said that Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character is depicted as better than Indy and that she shows him up over and over again. It doesn't happen. She's not depicted as better than him, and she doesn't show him up again. She's capable of certain things. She accomplishes certain things in the movie. So does Indy. How much less of a formidable person do the female characters have to be in these movies for these guys not to feel insulted? Can they not accomplish anything in these movies without being criticized for it? He then says that by the end of the movie, she inexplicably becomes a good guy. That's not true. By the end of the movie, yes, she changes from being a bad person to more of a good person. Her character evolves over the course of the movie. I don't want to tell you anything, Vic, but that's supposed to happen. And it's not inexplicable. First of all, I think that while she's behaving as a bad person at the beginning of the movie and through part of the movie, I don't think that's who she ever really was. I think she was a good person. She was going down a bad path. She was behaving badly. She was behaving in a misguided way. But I think at her core, she's a good character, first of all. Why? Because her father was a good person. So I think that's who she is ultimately. She went through some stuff, lost her dad in a not so great way, and she does some bad stuff and goes down some wrong paths. But by the end, after spending time with Indy and after really understanding what the Nazis are trying to do, she comes out of it and changes her ways and becomes a good person again at the end. That's not in any way inexplicable. And it is not in any way not logical. So it's just a bullshit critique. Doomcock also picks on the moment in the end where indeed Indy contemplates staying in history. And I already talked about that. It's just something that he does in a weak moment that's out of character because of where the character is psycho-emotionally at the time. And this is something characters sometimes do. So it's not valid to criticize that. The last thing I'm going to talk about that he said is how he said that Kathleen Kennedy, personally, specifically, deliberately had Phoebe Waller-Bridge punch Indy out as a final insult to the character because she wants to shit on the character, so they deliberately put this in the movie for that purpose. Well, Vic, just like Critical Drinker and Angry Joe before you, you seem to have forgotten about this moment from Raiders of the Lost Ark.
I need one of the pieces your father collected.
I learned to hate you in the last 10 years.
Now, did Spielberg or Lucas or whoever, did the powers that be put that moment in there to deliberately shit on Indy and perpetrate a final insult on the character? I think you know the answer is no. So you shouldn't have a problem with a similar thing happening in this movie. Now, in Raiders, he's not knocked out. He's just punched. But that's a distinction without a difference when we're talking about whether or not it was done to insult the character. It's not, it's just a narrative choice. As I said, sometimes characters need to be saved from themselves by the people around them. They need to be called on their bullshit and redirected by the people around them. It's a thing in stories. It doesn't make a movie bad. And it's not insulting to these characters that end up having that done for them. So it's just a bullshit critique. And that's really all I have to say. Another couple of guys who are making a lot of bullshit claims that just aren't true, either because they're outright lying to double down on the shit they said for so long before this movie came out as a way of saving face, or because they just didn't understand what they were seeing, and they don't have any business, in that case, offering their opinions to tens of thousands of people. And yes, I'm aware that tens of thousands of people watch their videos and subscribe to their channels. That doesn't make them right and me wrong. For the record, by the way, I hold an associate's degree in theater and a bachelor's degree in communication. Now, I'm not Martin Scorsese, but I've studied film and television and writing and acting and theater under both of those disciplines. So I kind of know what I'm talking about. This isn't to say that nobody who doesn't have those credentials doesn't know what they're talking about, but I guarantee you Gary's education is not in the theater or in writing. And I guarantee you the same is true about Doomcock and Critical Drinker and Angry Joe. That would be my guess. So you'll forgive me if I think that I know what I'm talking about more than they do in certain circumstances. Anyway, I'm done. I don't think there's going to be a part 3. There are a ton of these videos out there by people shitting all over this movie, but I don't think any of them are done by people as significant as the people that I've talked about in these 2 videos. So I'm not going to bother to do a part 3. There you go. Anyway, I'm going to get out of here. I'll be back soon. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.